where, in your opinion, does XRP in the lawsuit that XRP is in fit with this whole story, this timeline?
So XRP is probably my biggest holding. I think the technology solves a very specific problem. Now, XRP as a blockchain could be used for a variety of different things, but the product that Ripple created will help banks solve a problem via sort of pre-funding of accounts and sending payments across borders. Right now, that's slow and expensive. So I think from like looking at the business side, I think Ripple has figured out a great niche to serve. They have clients who have money, clients who have interest in their offer. As far as this lawsuit, this is where I kind of got interested in understanding more about geopolitics, because things aren't as simple as like all the bankers are on one team and everyone else is on some other team. It does, in my opinion, function more like a cartel where you have multiple factions, and none of these factions are good or bad. Just like forget about that kind of label. They all have their own interests to protect. Sometimes those interests align with ours. Sometimes they don't. And one thing I think that's happening now is there is two factions within the US. We have a faction that is more aligned with the European cartel. We can call them Davos. And this is really in line with Tom Luongo's thesis, if you're familiar with him. And so the European cartel is kind of old money. They're behind the World Economic Forum. They are pushing a feudalistic agenda where they kind of want to own all the resources and we own nothing. And that includes their tokenizing of all the world's natural resources, which is what the climate change agenda is ultimately driving. It will create tokenized oceans, tokenized air, tokenized land. And if you are not one of the people who owns all these things, which won't be any of us, we will be left renting and borrowing resources from the uber wealthy. Now, it's easy to assume that like everybody who's rich must be in bed with the World Economic Forum. But there's one thing that this is where like it gets complicated. A bank like JP Morgan makes all its money off the middle class. They make a lot of money. They make a lot of money off 401ks. They make a lot of money off mortgages and car loans. If the World Economic Forum got their way and there was no more middle class and we were all serfs, peasants, JP Morgan would have no market. Like, who would they sell to? Like, they would essentially, the entire Wall Street industry would be gone. And they have a lot of power because of their wealth. So this is where this Tom Luongo theory of the Fed being a separate faction from Davos and they're kind of at odds with each other is very interesting to look into, which is why the Fed keeps raising rates, knowing that it's hurting their own businesses, right? The Fed raise rates, it makes people unable to buy mortgages. They start defaulting on loans, like it hurts them. Why would they do that? And it's because they are looking to take out this Davos crowd, this Davos faction, who uses the offshore banking industry called the euro dollar market to fund all of their nefarious plans. So I think that looking at Ripple specifically, it looks like they are right now serving a client base that's primarily aligned with Davos. You can usually tell this because they focus on things like carbon credit markets, which are a very interesting rabbit hole we could talk about separately. The kind of energy usage around cryptocurrencies while they fly on a private jet to these events. There's a lot of hypocrisy that goes on. And it's very clear, I think, that's why I said that Sam Bankman-Fried video was a Davos puppet thing, is because all of the talking points in that video were exactly World Economic Forum agenda points that kind of tie into their feudalistic goals. But I actually am fairly optimistic, ironically, that JP Morgan is not on board with this. And while I don't think JP Morgan or any of those large Wall Street banks are necessarily our friend, in this particular instance, it's sort of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that they are combating this Davos agenda simply because if Davos wins, JP Morgan loses. So I think that is part of what's behind this Ripple lawsuit, was, yes, JP Morgan probably wanted to own the rails of cross-border payments because there's a lot of money there. But I think they also don't want to wipe out commercial banks. And if we all move to a central bank digital currency world, it essentially removes commercial banks from the flow of money. If the money, right now, the central bank creates reserves, they go to a commercial bank, the commercial bank issues loans, credit cards, etc. And the commercial banks have a very active role in how money is created and money works, and they make a lot of money off interest. In a CBDC world where all the money is minted on the blockchain, how do commercial banks make money? Like, that's the end of them.
That's a very interesting point, and I never have thought of it that way. So you're saying that JP Morgan and Ripple basically have the same common enemy. Is that what you're saying? Or
I think Ripple...
Or are you saying that Ripple is working with the Davos World Economic Forum crowd?
Simply because they go to the World Economic Forum events, they're on the World Economic Forum website, they are also pushing carbon credit markets and central bank digital currencies. Ripple seems aligned. I don't know if like someone like Brad Garlinghouse shares those values of feudalism, but it looks like those are their clients and they have to toe the line as long as they choose to work for central banks. I would love to be wrong about Ripple, to be honest. I own Ripple private equity. I own a lot of XRP. I do think that there are some things about those products that aren't in the interests of humanity.
Well, XRP would be the rails for the CBD system that you're talking about, the World Economic Forum, the Davos entities want to push, which would remove commercial banks and the ability for JP Morgan and others to collect all their fees and make all their money. So what you're saying is that JP Morgan is helping to slow down or stop the CBDC one world government, one world bank, one world dollar agenda. Is that kind of
correct? And it might not be because they're good guys. It might be simply because it doesn't benefit them.
It's about money. It's about money. Yeah.
Now, the other thing to remember too is there's two kinds of CBDCs. This is really important. Wholesale CBDCs are really what Ripple's primarily focused on. And that's how banks send money to other banks. I have zero concerns about wholesale CBDCs. I think they actually solve an efficiency problem. This is what ODL is for. When you talk about how there would be a private ledger where banks exchange money with other banks, that's all wholesale CBD stuff. I think that's great. My concerns, the dystopian stuff, comes in with a retail CBDC, which Ripple doesn't seem to be as actively involved in, even though they have employees at Ripple whose like title is CBDC stuff. So we'll see. I mean, Stellar, to be honest, is also in the retail CBDC space. And the CEO, or I guess it's a nonprofit, whether she's CEO or some other title, Danelle Dixon, I did hear her say that, you know, you can issue programmable money on a private ledger on the Stellar blockchain, but she hopes that there's like human rights are not violated in that. So I think that she's the only person I saw at that level who did even reference that this could be used for nefarious purposes if you allow government to program money. So I don't really necessarily know how it's going to net out. I mean, it's like the internet. The internet can be used for great purposes or for evil purposes. Same thing with programmable money. Like if you have really good people with integrity managing the smart contracts, like we're good. There's no problem there. The problem comes in when you have somebody managing the smart contract on a CBDC retail one, and they use it for their own power and manipulation of people.
Okay. And so we've talked about this. I wanted to go back real quick before we continue. Where do you think that this lawsuit ends up? How do you think this XRP lawsuit ends up when this finally concludes, hopefully soon sometime?
I've read through a lot of the documentation from the very generous attorneys like John Deaton who have shared a lot of insight into this. It doesn't look to me like the SEC has made a case that XRP is a security at all, especially because there are other projects that can be run on the XRP ledger, and XRP can be used as a short-term loan, which is this idea of the Reeves test and whether it's a note. what I think will happen is that the SEC will settle or lose, and XRP will be the only digital asset that has clarity that it is not a security other than potentially Bitcoin. And a lot of other digital assets will probably go away because there'll be too much uncertainty as to whether or not they're securities or not. I am also a believer that the next sort of big run, or if you want to call it that, in digital assets will come with utility tokens, where assets that banks and institutional businesses, enterprise companies use to solve painful and expensive problems will be adopted. And this is areas of like trade finance, where if you want to ship widgets from China to Florida, there's a lot of people along the way who have to get paid and a lot of paperwork that has to get taken care of. And tokens like XDC, for example, fit into making that more expensive and less expensive and more efficient. Those are real use cases that they're not sexy and fun like gaming and NFTs, but those are industries with tons of money that need to be updated. So I think we will see the utility tokens that have not gotten press. They're not getting covered on the financial news networks, but they are being used by institutional businesses where companies like IBM and Accenture have been working for years to help those industries move to the blockchain. That is where I see the next area of focus, and XRP is part of that.